Hi guys, it's Jake here. This is Canadian Cutting Edge, and today we have a how-to special to share with you. I'm doing a special on what do I do when I get a knife and I've got my knife. What do I do? Well, I almost always do a little bit of maintenance on my knife brand new when I get it home. Maintenance, I haven't even used it yet. Well, yeah, the first thing I do is I play with it for about 5, 10, 15 minutes or whatever. And the next thing I do with it is I take it apart, get to know the knife, everything about it, check out all the parts and everything on it. And basically, I give it a tune-up when it's brand new. I got to give you a context before we get too deep into this video. The context is the type of knives that I buy. This video is not about, buying a Chris Reeve Sebenza or any other knife like that. Not a custom knife, not a high-end production knife, not a mid-tech, none of those kinds of knives. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about budget knives that, made in China, made in the US, made in Taiwan, made in wherever. But low-cost knives, well, actually any amount of money is a good enough reason to want to maintain them well. And, something as low cost as, this thing, a no-name knife from GearBest. I don't do reviews on no-name knives. I just bought it because I wanted to check it out. This is the PA60 if you are looking at GearBest. And I just wanted to check out this knife. And so what do? I take them apart and I take a good look at them. So you know what types of knives I'm talking about. So what I'll do is, just like my other videos, we'll get the camera set in the tabletop mode and I'll talk you through what I do to make sure my knife is optimized to work as good as it possibly can. Stick around. The first thing I do is I get some cardboard and some painter's tape, and I find a well-lit location. And for me, it's in my kitchen. And I don't like things sliding around. So what I actually do is I take painter's tape and I tape the cardboard down onto the kitchen table. Painter's tape comes off easily so that it doesn't get my wife upset. The reason I do that is because I'm going to be using some, I might use some oil or some grease or stuff, and I don't want to get that on the table and, get my wife upset or whatever. I might even use some thread locker, and if I do that, that eats through varnish and things on a table surface, and you don't want to do that. So I'll get that done first, and then the next thing I do is I get all my tools within reach, followed by a little bit of safety. I like to tape off the sharp edge of the blade. Today already I cut my thumb. I was just goofing off watching Netflix. Another very good idea is to get yourself a little Tupperware dish, like a leftover margarine bowl, whatever. And you use those, put your little screws and things in while you're working. I like to use high-end drivers because high-end drivers are much less likely to strip your screws. It's not a bad idea to take pictures. Like if you're not videotaping yourself, take pictures of what you're doing. If you're a guy that tends to forget how to put things back together, there's nothing wrong with being, one of those kinds of people. Not all of us have the same kind of memory for putting things back together as others. Wow, that was just right loose. from the factory, this screw was right loose. I just barely turned it. It's another reason why it's a good thing to check your knives when you're brand new. You just never know what condition they're in. If I wouldn't have checked that screw, I would have thought that it was tight from the factory, but you just don't know. You just don't know for sure. So there you go. There's this guy. And you get to see how it's made. Small liner. There's your back spacer for your lanyard hole. Put that in there. Put that aside. Lift this up. So we've got a little white nylon washer there. This is the no-name knife, so I don't expect it to be in perfect condition. There you go. So there's the other nylon washer. Okay, so a simple knife like this, there's really not much to it. There's your pivot. It's a D-shaped one. There's your nylon washers. What do I do? Well, there's a couple things that I do. I move my stuff out of the way. Just have the blade left. I take out my strop. I've got two strops here, both glued to wood. Actually, they come from the same piece of leather. This piece has got the outside of the hide facing up, and this one's got the inside of the hide facing up. And I've charged them up. Actually, I should probably recharge these. This has the green compound on it, and no, this one had the white compound on it. This guy had the green compound on it. And basically what I do is I've got this knife cleaned up like this, and what I want to do is I want this thing to perform well. So I need everything as smooth as possible. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to buff my blade surface, this surface right here. So I take it and I start to buff it up. And it tends to work better for this particular job on the strop that has the hairy side up. And I just move it around and around in circles. And so basically what I'm doing is I'm polishing the surface that the bearing is going to ride on. Not the bearing, the washer is going to ride on. There's no bearings on this knife. And make that surface that tiny bit smoother to give the action a little bit better action, for lack of a better word. You can see how if I hadn't taped this, this would be a dangerous thing to do. Not bad. You can see how reflective that's starting to look compared to this side. Oh, maybe it doesn't look that different on this camera. I can see a difference already. And do the other side as well. You have to give it a fair bit of pressure for this type of surface. What I can show you here is, I don't know if you can see it. I guess you can if I get it just on the right angle. There you go. You can see that little bit of line etched right there. You can see where the washer was riding. It has been scraping a line into this metal already. And as you saw, the washers here are just nylon. So that tells you something, that this thing already has been having a problem just sliding smoothly. It doesn't sit quite flat. So the more I can polish these surfaces, the better I can make this thing slide. The better it slides, the easier it will open. The easier it opens, the better the action. Well, that's easier it opens means better action, right? So that's just being redundant, saying the same thing over again and repeating myself too. So I just keep on buffing, just keep buffing, just keep buffing. How long do I keep buffing? till I'm done. How do I know when I'm done? When I decide to stop. How do I decide when to stop? You know, it's a tough decision. The more I like the knife, the pickier I am. The more I've spent on the knife, the pickier I am. The worse the knife is, and if I want it to be great, you know, the longer I take to give it a good kind of finish. And then you use a paper towel to clean up after yourself, to get whatever dust you created off of there. All right. Okay, so that's step one. Step one is done. So I set this aside onto a clean spot beside everything. Come back to my stuff here. Take this washer off, put the washer in the bowl, and guess what I'm going to do? The same thing with this. This is the side that the washer rides on, so that's the side I'm going to buff. And get everything out of that detent ball. Clean that thing right out really, really well. There you go. Very good. Okay, so now we're down to the two washers. So now I've got an option. I can use these washers, or I can replace the washers. There are about 4 or 5 main types of washers. You've got nylon, Teflon, that's either white or black, kind of plasticky. In layman's terms, they're plasticky. You can get bronze, brass, copper, aluminum, steel. You can get all kinds of washers. I'm just going to leave the existing washers on, but I can clean them up before I use them. And believe it or not, I can clean them up the same way that I cleaned up the steel liners. I can buff them on my leather. Now, you can do this with your phosphor bronze washers. You could do this with aluminum washers. You could do this with bronze washers. You can do these with brass washers. You can do this with any washer you possibly ever could think of having. What you're doing is you're just polishing that surface that little bit. And we're ready for reassembly. Actually, not quite. We got to clean this guy up too. If some of the stuff here is really, really dirty, and it shouldn't be when it's brand new, but if it is really, really dirty, you need to get out some mineral spirits, not the kind that you use in the home for your digestive system or something, the kind that you use in the garage. Acetone, denatured alcohol, paint thinner, whatever you have that's handy that you can use that will take off grease and oil and everything. And you clean these guys up really good so that everything has the oil cleaned off of it. Now, believe it or not, this knife, I believe, was assembled without any lubricants whatsoever. When I took it apart, I could just tell that they had put it together with nothing. And that explains part of the action that it had. So what do I do about that? Well, I'm going to lubricate it. And I don't have one special lubricant to tell you to buy. I'm trying a number of different options. And so you can try a number of different options as well. One thing that I did was, this is a choice that I'm recommending. I've tried this for a little while. It's quite inexpensive. I'll put a link in the description below. For you Americans, it's really cheap. From Amazon.com, the Sportsman's kit, the synthetic lubricant. It comes with some lubricating pads that you can use to clean up stuff. It's got some pads in there as well. It's got instructions in there. It's got some synthetic grease, and it has this grease as well, which has, it's a really light oil, not grease, this one's oil, and it's got a nice little tip so that you can put oil in a very specific little spot. And so what we're going to do with this is, I'm going to clean some of this. I'll put the cap back on here first. I got to finish cleaning up this area a bit before I get ahead of myself. I've got some fresh paper towel put down so that I can put the clean stuff on top of here without getting any transfer, or less transfer, I should say. This isn't like a totally sanitary job. Here's another here's another oil that I've tried. This one's called Break Free CLP. Precision Shooter. This one has a metal tip, and it's much finer, so it can get into really tight spots, I should say. If you need to lubricate a knife after it's assembled, this is a really good tip for that. Whereas, this one is much, as you can see right there, it's much wider, that tip is, than this fine one. I also have been trying this TETRA Gun Grease, fluoropolymer penetrating heavy-duty grease lubricant, the major advance in firearm lubrication. It's been working very, very well. I've been using this on bearings. I use grease on bearings, oil on washers. So let's get started. So I take this and I just very lightly put a few little drops of oil onto the parts that I can see just the way they are already sitting. The more I get now, the less I have to do later. Just a little bit, and not an awful lot. It just a little bit. Okay, so got those 3 spots, and then I take my washer, give it a final little wipe down just to make sure I've got all the lint off of it. Okay, that's nice and clean. And I take my pivot arm, and notice that these pivot arms, most of them, bars, have one flat spot on them. They're not totally round. That keeps them from turning along. Some of them, even though they're flat, they still have an end for a screwdriver. Make sure that you don't turn that end because you're going to strip it out. Take my washer, drop it in place. The very next thing that I do is important. I take the tip of a screwdriver and I turn that washer around. I spin it on that oil. And I notice there's just a little bit of dirt there. And I can wipe that off now because this side of the washer is still dry. And any oil that I wipe off is extra oil anyway, so it doesn't matter if I wipe off some oil. Okay, so got the dust off of there. And keep my finger on that thing so the pivot doesn't come out. And where did I put my oil? I'm really, really great for putting stuff down and losing it. And then I put a little bit of oil on this side of the washer. Just a few tiny little touches, very little. You don't need much at all. It's a common mistake that people make to put on way too much. and then you're just making a mess. And a mess will not help you at all. All right, so there we go. There's the tiny bit of oil. The next thing that goes on is the knife. You just make sure the orientation is correct. And slide that on. And I'm going to switch hands here because I'm left-handed. It's just a little bit easier this way. And I've already got oil on that side, so put that on. And I'm going to use this tip of my screwdriver again just to turn that. Make sure that there's a lot of oil all over that thing. And I don't need to put oil on the other side of this washer because I already have it on this thing. So the next step I want to do is put this in here. Make sure it's all lined up. Where's my lock? Okay, the lock arm's there. What am I missing? Put this tube back there. I'm not missing anything. It's just going to be a little tricky. Maybe I can put it down without it falling. Oh, good. Okay, so everything's down there. Everything's in place. There's a little bit of oil on this side. Hold it in place back here and just gently put everything back in its spot. Or actually, I can put the steel on first. It's not going to want to sit right in the right spot because this bearing arm, actually I missed a step. I apologize, back up a step. Before you put this on, there's one spot where I'm going to use that grease. And actually I'm going to use the Super Lube grease. And I'm going to put just a tiny dab of this Super Lube grease on this ball. Very tiny little dab. Again, most people use way too much. It doesn't take much at all. Just a dab will do you. The reason you don't want to do too much is you don't want to get any grease on the mating surface of this liner lock. And since that ball is so close, because grease on the mating surface of the locking arm and the back of the tang of the blade is going to cause stick. And so you're going to get lock stick more easily if you get lubricant on that surface there. Does it make sense? Go ahead and ask questions if you need to. And let's put this on there. Get those lined up. And that's almost lined up. Okay, I just got that hole lined up, this one lined up. That's good. Okay, now I know that these other holes back here are not lined up properly. That's okay. The only thing I'm going to do is get this started. And so I'm just getting that started, just so that if I let go, it's not going to fall apart. And so now I unlock that, close the blade, because then once the blade's closed, I can line up the rest of the holes. And yep, they all line up. Make sure I keep pressure evenly around the whole thing. What some guys do is they keep small elastic bands with them and they quickly put rubber bands over stuff. I tend not to need it. And, start putting the screws back together. Now don't tighten them up yet, just put them in part way. The first one that I want to tighten all the way will be the pivot arm, the pivot screw. Okay, that's getting pretty good. Take this tape off. So you can see it's way off, not anywhere near where it should be. Not a problem at all, because we're not done. So what you do is you tighten it up fairly tight, and you lock and unlock. open, close, open, close. You do that 10, 15 times. I usually try to not open it all the way to get it to the lock position because I'd rather not have to unlock it. So I open most of the way, close, open most of the way, close, and do that a number of times. And what I'm doing is I'm making the oil move around. I'm making the washers seat themselves. And then I tighten it up a little bit more. Do it some more. Tighten it up some more. I try to get it very, very tight. On some knives, you're going to be able to get it so tight that you won't be able to move it. You know, of course, then you're going to back off. The reason you're getting it tight is you want to get those washers seated. And then once you've got it nice and tight, you check if the blade centering's good. Blade centering's perfect. Now, I can't really check if it's gonna open well or not because I cut my thumb. I cut it pretty badly today right there, just by goofing off. So let's get rid of that. Close this up. And let's back this off just a little bit. Blade centering's still really good. Now you have another thing to think about, and that is, do you want to use a thread locker? I always use thread locker. Always use thread locker on my pivot screw. But I choose between blue or red. Blue is medium strength. Red is high strength. You can have different brands of it. This is Permatex. There's various brands. The other brands use the same color coding. Red is, if you know that this knife is not going to need to come apart, and you know that if it is going to need to come apart, that pivot screw will not strip out, then you can use the high strength. This pivot screw is an Allen, and it's a rather large one, so that won't strip out. I could use the permanent on here, and if I did need to take this apart, I'd be able to take it apart without stripping that. Pocket clip back on. And then I will set it aside for 24 hours. And then it will be ready to play with. What do you think of that? I think you get the general idea. You do the same thing with your other knives. It's just how you take it apart will be different. And with your bearings, instead of using oil, you pack a little bit of grease in your bearings instead of oil. And bearings can take a good amount of grease in them. The last thing you want is your bearings to go dry. A dry bearing is a nasty bearing. Remember, your detent is a bearing. It's a ball. So you don't want your detent to go dry, and you don't want your bearings to go dry either. That looks good. So you just let it sit now.